I had a request for this seahorse pendant, so here goes. You can make it with any little seed beads or bugle beads you've got to hand. It's just like colouring in with beads, and you can use crystals around the side. You can see all the alternatives and variations that you can do, and you can scale it up and scale it down. So this is just to give you an idea of how I created it. So I'm going to use some purpley coloured beads, and to get started I would draw the outline of the size that you want to make it. So, depending if it's going to be very small or large, something for the wall or something for jewellery, draw out the outline, and that will give you a sort of starting point, because you can put a piece of string around the line, and that gives you an indication of how much wire you need to cut to create the actual outer frame. So use that as your measurement. And you're going to be making 3 different components. One is the framework, the eye, and the little fin. So I'm using 0.8, that's 20 gauge. So I've got silver plated copper 0.8 millimeter. And I'm going to start at the very end by creating a very small circle, and I'm basically starting off with a spiral. So start off with a tiny circle and then roll that into a little spiral, and that's going to be the outer part of the mouth, and that's where I start, and then start shaping it to the sort of template framework or line drawing that you've made for yourself. So just shape it with your fingers, with mandrels, with pliers, with anything you've got to hand. And don't forget, if you're not very good at drawing, you never have to worry, because there's loads of illustrations and line drawings and tattoo drawings online. So whatever you want to create in wire, you'll find a drawing of it or a line drawing of it on online, so, or from a book or from somewhere, so you can just trace it. So make the outer frame, and once you've got the outer frame done, you want to connect it where the mouth is, because it's open there and it's going to wobble around and misshape. So we're going to bind that together. So I'm going to use a bit of 0.4, 26 gauge, 0.4 mil binding wire, but you can use any wire to hand. I just want to keep it in the same colours as my piece. And so I'm going to wrap just where those 2 lines of the mouth or snout or whatever you want to call it, and keep it nice and neat, because the binding is going to show and it's going to be part of the decoration. So make sure all your working wire and your binding wire looks as neat as possible. And also remember to cut off any spiky ends and press them down with the tips of your chain nose pliers, so that there's nothing that's going to snag on clothing later on. So you can always roll up those little spirals closer up so it's not so long. And once you've got that shape, it's now a proper framework, and we need to work hard on it just to fix it, so to make it absolutely strong. So use your whammer hammer, the steel head, and or a planishing hammer, and just go around the outer frame, and this will work hard and make it firm and solid. Try and avoid hammering the binding wires too much, because they'll weaken, so just go for the actual outer frame wire. And now you've got your framework. He does look rather pregnant. I made him a bit tubby. I think we'll call him Tubby the seahorse. The next thing is to make the eye. So I'm going to use 0.8 of a millimeter, 20 gauge again, same wire I used for the framework, and I'm going to get a little bead for the eye, and I'm going to put that on. I'm not cutting the wire off at this stage, and I'm going to create a sort of hook with my round nose pliers, a sort of semicircle, and then I'm going to push the bead into that little hook and bring the wire around to close the circle around the bead. So the bead is caught up in the wire now, and then I will spiral the wire around that bead. So this is where the for the eye. So you don't want to make the spiral bigger than the actual seahorse head. It's got to fit within the framework. So just measure that, and then leave about an inch projecting from that spiral. Now we're going to wire or bind that in with the 0.4 mil again. So cut a little bit off that. Place the eye spiral at the top of the framework where you position it exactly where you want it, and then use that bit of binding wire to bind around, so to hook it on to the top framework. So the wire from the spiral and the wire of the frame are connected, and that will secure the eye in place at the top of the frame. So you don't need masses of wire for this, just a few little sort of like stitches. I mean, this is because we can't solder the silver plated copper wire, and so all these little bindings are where we would have normally put a bit of solder to connect it. So once you've got that in place and you've got the projecting wire sticking out, don't cut off your binding wire just yet, because you might want to use a bit more of that. So now create the suspension link that is going to be at the top of the seahorse. So you've got now a link sitting right at the top, and that's where you can hang the seahorse from if you're going to put it on a chain or however you're going to hang it. I mean, if you're going to make a larger one, scale this up. Obviously use thicker wire, but you still might want to hang it. It could be nice hanging in a bathroom from a piece of driftwood or something. And so now we want to just work harden that top link. So only at the tip, give it a few little stroke hammers to work harden it. Right, the next thing is the fin on the back. So go about an inch along, bend it, double the wire up, and then squeeze the tip to create a point. And then you're going to create sort of two little U bends. So you're scalloping the wire. So back around, squeeze it, back around, and again. You can see it's three little points, but if you want to make the fin a bit longer, you can put 4 or 5 little points. If you wanted to make the seahorse into a sort of dragon or a mythical creature, you could make this into a much larger sort of big wing or something like that on the back. So there's all sorts of things you can play with. You can make up your own sort of monsters and creatures in this way. So with the two projecting ends, you're going to connect it to the back of your frame. I mean, you can hammer it at this stage, but I'm going to bind it on first and then hammer the very ends just to toughen and temper the wire. So just wrap the wire around, not too many times, because you don't want it to be too bulky, and then make sure that the ends are squashed down. And that's one side, and then work on the other wire and get that positioned exactly where you want it and how you want it. So just take your time on positioning, because this is the framework is, pretty much everything. The rest is just colouring in with beads. So once you've got your framework, you're just going to be weaving little seed beads within it. So second side is done now, and I'm just going to neaten it up. And squidge it around and reposition it. That's the great thing about wire, isn't it? It's so malleable that you can keep moving it and tweaking it and removing it and putting it back on. So hammer the very, very ends, the points. That's all you need to hammer. So now we're ready to start with the beading. And this is going to be fun. This is just collecting your beads, taking a lovely long piece of 0.4 for the weaving wire, and I'm going to start with the outside. So where the fin is, I'm going to bead some crystals, some little purple crystals, all along the back. You see, all the way down. I've used a large crystal and a small seed bead alternatively on that one, on the green one. On this one, I think I'll just use the purple crystals I've got to hand here. So begin by securing the wire. Leave a little extra projecting wire at the end, but make sure it's nice and secure. Then pick up one, just do it one by one. Pick up one of your little crystals and drop it exactly at the edge of the framework. Hold it at the framework. Bring the wire nice and tight, close up to the bead, and bring the wire completely around so that it's secured at the place that you want it to be. And you're going to do this with every bead. So each bead individually, thread it on, hold it where you want it to sit, grip it there, and pull the wire nice and tight and connect it by securing the wire completely around the frame. And you go on all the way down. When you get to the fin, you don't need to put beads within the fin. You can just weave the wire, plain wire, in and out of the framework to get to the back side. And then when you get to the very tip, you can see I've used smaller beads. I've just used some seed beads that match, and that you can see the fin is just wired with the wire, plain wire. And the next bit is the body. So we're going to be using seed beads, and I'm using 2 tones of seed beads only because I quite like stripy things. I've got a bit of wire left over from wiring the whole of the, all the crystals in the back. So I'm going to continue using it until it's completely finished. So I'm popping a bead within the space at the end of the tail, because I'm going to be filling all those gaps. So if you have wire left over like me, just use it until the end, because the less times you start and stop and reconnect wires, the less little end you're going to have. So just keep going down and around the inside of the shape, filling in the gaps to sort of colour in the body with your seed beads, your chosen seed beads. And the good thing about having done the crystals on the outer side, you can position your wires in between as you're moving around. They'll sit in between the gaps where you've threaded those crystals. And when you run out of wire, which you will, you can easily connect another thin 0.4 wire again where you last left off, secure it in, and away you go. So you can keep adding wires. That's never a problem, as long as you make sure the ends are neat and well cut off. So there, I've got up to nearly the end. I've been beading. I didn't want to bore you with watching me. And I'm just put a new wire on to finish off the top near the head. So you can see I've just done lines of alternate colour, and I've got just a few more. I mean, you don't have to fill the whole thing with beads. You could stop there and leave a gap between the eye, but I quite like the whole piece to be solid, a solid beaded piece. So I'm just carrying on, going backwards and forwards with little rows of the beads I've chosen and filling that inner gap and then binding it always to the opposite side of the frame to secure. And then I think I've probably got room for maybe just one more layer, and that will be it. And then the beads will touch the eye unit there. So just one more, I think. I'll go for the darker ones. So this is just very easy to do. You could, get your kids to finish this bit off. The beading bit is just weaving really backwards and forwards. And now once you've got all the beads in place, you're going to be doing all the finishing off. So once everything is filled, you're going to cut off any excess wires and make sure all the ends are neat. So I'm going to cut off my weaving wire, make sure that's completely neat. There's where I started again, I'm going to cut off that bit, neaten that down. And then there's a wire still left at the top. As you know, I never cut that off. And if you do have that, don't worry if you don't. If you do have, like me, a wire left there, you can turn it into a tiny little, a small spiral. So a little circle, roll the wire around the circle until it comes in, and then you can flatten it against the top of the unit, because if you flatten it there, that's where some of the binding is. So choose which side is your front at this point and put that little spiral on the front side, and it will go over your binding wire right at the top on the suspension link and hide the workings. So now you can tweak those little wires in the fin just to make it look a little bit more interesting. So do little twists, and that just adds a little bit of interest to the piece. And spend a bit of time making sure the beads are sort of look neat. And now you're really just ready to put it on a jump ring and a chain. And there's Tubby finished and ready to go. So do enjoy making your own little seahorse pendants. Thank you for watching.